My grandmother promised me $25,000, a modest safety net to catch me after my divorce, but when the will was read, my aunt and uncle told me there was nothing left, offering only polite smiles and a sympathy that felt like ice. They thought I would fade away quietly, too broken to fight. They were wrong. They tried to steal my inheritance, so I exposed their fraud and took their $2.2 million estate instead. The drive back to Cedar Hollow felt like moving backward in time. The Pennsylvania Turnpike unspooled in a long gray ribbon of asphalt, flanked by trees that had already surrendered their leaves to November. I kept the radio off. The silence in my Honda Civic was heavy, but it was better than the noise inside my head. I was 33 years old, and everything I owned was packed into the trunk or sitting in a few cardboard boxes in a rental apartment above a closed-down florist shop on Main Street. My grandmother, Marlene Baker, was gone. Grief is a strange, hollow ache, but mine was compounded by a sharp, terrified anxiety. I loved my grandmother. She had been the only person who looked at me during my divorce not with pity, but with recognition. She knew what it was like to have to start over. In our last few phone calls, her voice raspy but insistent, she had been clear. "Addison, honey, I have put something aside for you, $25,000. It is not a fortune, but it is enough to breathe, enough to get your feet on the ground. $25,000. To the wealthy, it was a vacation. To me, right now, it was oxygen. It was the difference between panic and planning. It was the security deposit on a real apartment, a used car that did not shudder when it hit 60 miles an hour, and a few months of breathing room while I looked for a job that paid more than the temp work I had been scraping by with." I pulled into the parking lot of Huxley and Morrow Estate Law. The building was a brick colonial that tried too hard to look historic, with ivy trained aggressively up the sides. My Aunt Tessa's white Range Rover was already parked in the front spot, gleaming despite the overcast sky. Beside it was my Uncle Graham's sedan. I checked my face in the rearview mirror. I looked tired. The dark circles under my eyes were stubborn, and my hair, usually a neat chestnut bob, felt limp. I straightened my blazer. It was 3 years old, but it was the best thing I had. I walked in. The reception area smelled of lemon polish and old paper. The receptionist pointed me toward the conference room without asking my name. Inside, the air was stiflingly warm. Tessa Rowland sat at the mahogany table, her posture rigid, her hands clasped around a take-out coffee cup. She wore a black dress that cost more than my car, and her face was composed into a mask of tragic dignity. Graham sat next to her, looking at his phone. He nodded at me, a quick, dismissive jerk of the chin. "Addison," Tessa said. Her voice was soft, cultivated. "We were not sure you would make it. The traffic can be terrible." "I made good time," I said, taking the seat opposite them. The door opened, and Warren Morrow swept in. He was a man who took up space, with broad shoulders and a suit that strained at the buttons. He had been handling the Baker family legal matters for as long as I could remember, though I had never liked the way his eyes slid over people, assessing their value rather than their humanity. "Shall we begin?" Morrow asked. He did not wait for an answer. He sat at the head of the table and opened a thick file folder. I folded my hands in my lap to hide the tremor. I just needed to get through this. I just needed that check. Morrow cleared his throat. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Marlene Elizabeth Baker," he began. "As you know, Marlene's health declined rapidly in the last 6 months. During that time, she expressed a desire to simplify her affairs." He pushed a document toward the center of the table. "This is the most recent will, dated October 14th of this year." Morrow said. My stomach dropped. October 14th. That was only 3 weeks before she died. I thought her will was from 5 years ago. I said, "The one Eldon Pike wrote." Morrow smiled, a tight stretching of lips that did not reach his eyes. "People change their minds, Addison, especially at the end." Marlene wanted clarity. She wanted to ensure that the bulk of the estate remained intact and was managed by those with the experience to handle it. He began to read. It was standard legalese at first, droning and dense, but then came the distribution of assets. To my daughter, Tessa Rowland, and her husband, Graham Rowland. I leave the property known as Rowland Ridge Estate, along with the contents of the home, all personal effects, and the entirety of my savings and investment accounts, to be administered as they see fit for the preservation of the family legacy. I waited. I waited for my name. I waited for the specific bequest she had promised me. Morrow flipped a page. He read a clause about charitable donations to something called the Harborlight Heritage Fund. He read a clause about funeral expenses. Then he closed the folder. "Wait," I said. The word came out louder than I intended. Tessa looked at me, her eyebrows lifting slightly. "Is that it?" I asked. Morrow looked at me over his reading glasses. "The will is quite clear. Addison. Marlene left the entire residuary estate to Tessa and Graham. But she told me," I said, my voice rising. "She told me specifically. She said she had set aside $25,000 for me. She said it was in the will." Graham sighed. A heavy, impatient sound. "Addison," Tessa said, her voice dropping to a whisper meant to sound comforting. Mother was very confused at the end. We all saw it. She would say things that did not make sense. She probably thought she had money she did not have, or she was remembering something from years ago. She was not confused when I spoke to her. I said, she was lucid. She knew I was moving back. She wanted to help. She wanted to help everyone. Graham said. He leaned forward, his elbows on the table. But the reality is, end-of-life care is expensive. The estate is not what you think it is. Addison, between the medical bills and the taxes, there is barely enough to keep the house running. That is a lie, I thought, but I did not say it. Morrow slid a single sheet of paper toward me. "Since you are not a beneficiary under this will, Addison, we do not technically need your signature on the probate filings. However, to avoid any potential delays or unnecessary court costs that would drain the little that is left, we would appreciate you signing this waiver. It simply states that you accept the validity of this will and waive your right to contest it." I looked at the paper, waiver of process and consent to probate. It felt like a trap. "I need to read the will." I said. "Of course," Morrow said, though his jaw tightened. "You are welcome to read the copy right here." I pulled the document toward me. The text was blurred by my own panic, but I forced myself to focus. I had spent the last 2 years navigating a divorce settlement with a husband who tried to hide assets. I learned to look at paperwork. I scanned the pages. I saw my grandmother's signature at the bottom of each page. It looked shaky, weaker than the letters she had sent me just 2 months ago. Then I saw it. In the 3rd paragraph, the will referred to the main property. "I hereby bequeath the property located at 440 Ridge Road, affectionately known as the Lake House." I froze. "What is wrong?" Tessa asked. "She never called it the Lake House," I said quietly. "Excuse me?" Morrow asked. "Grandma?" I said, looking up. "She never called the estate the Lake House. There is no lake. There is a creek 3 miles away. But she always called the property Rowland Ridge or just the Ridge. She hated when people called it a lake house because it made it sound like a vacation rental." Tessa laughed. A brittle, tinkling sound. "Oh, Addison, don't be pedantic. It is just a name." Morrow drafted the language based on her instructions. Perhaps she was feeling nostalgic, or perhaps she did not write this. I thought. I looked at the initials on the bottom right corner of page 3. M.E.B. Marlene Elizabeth Baker. The B was looped at the bottom. My grandmother always crossed her capital B with a straight line, a habit from her days as a schoolteacher. This loop looked lazy. It looked like someone trying to draw a B. Not write one. "I am not signing this," I said. "Not today." Morrow's face darkened. "Addison, be reasonable. Contesting a will is an expensive, ugly process. It will cost you thousands of dollars you do not have. Tessa and Graham are trying to be generous by not asking you to pay for your share of the funeral." "My share of the funeral?" I stared at him. "We paid for everything," Graham said sharply. "The service, the casket, the flowers. It adds up. I stood up. My legs felt weak, but I locked my knees. I need time to process this. I am not signing anything right now. I walked out. I felt their eyes boring into my back. I felt the heat of Graham's anger and the cool, calculated disappointment of Tessa. When I got to my car, I sat behind the wheel and shook. I did not cry. I could not cry. Crying was a luxury for people who had a safety net. I had nothing. I had a rental apartment paid up for 30 days, a checking account with $400 in it, and a family that had just cut me out of my life like a tumor. I drove to the florist shop. The apartment upstairs was small, smelling faintly of dried roses and dust. I sat on the edge of the mattress, which was still on the floor because I could not afford a bed frame yet. The shame washed over me. I had counted on that money. I had built my entire escape plan around it. Without it, I was just a divorced, 33-year-old failure living in her hometown, scraping by while her aunt and uncle lived in a mansion on the hill. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my cousin Lila. Tessa and Graham's daughter. Meet me at the darker side of the park? 10 minutes. Please don't tell them. Lila was the quiet one. She was 28, still living in the carriage house on the estate, terrified of her own shadow, and, more specifically, her mother. I drove to the park. It was a small wooded area near the library. Lila was sitting on a swing, wrapped in a beige trench coat that looked too big for her. "Hey," I said, walking up to the fence. She jumped. "Oh, hi, Addison." She looked around nervously. "I heard about the meeting. Mom was venting." "I bet she was," I said. Lila looked down at her boots. They were expensive leather, scuffed at the toes. "They are saying you are unstable, Addison, because of the divorce. They are telling people you came back just for money." I laughed. A harsh sound. "I came back because I had nowhere else to go. Lila, and Grandma told me she had left me something." Lila twisted a ring on her finger. "They were there every day," she whispered. "Who?" "Mom and Dad. For the last month, they were at Grandma's house every single day. They said they were helping her with appointments, but they were managing her mail. They took her phone away at night, said she needed rest." My chest tightened. "They controlled her communication?" Lila nodded. "And the lawyer, Mr. Morrow? He came over for dinner twice. Grandma never liked him. She called him a vulture. But suddenly he was there, bringing papers." "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. Lila looked up, her eyes watery. "Because it is wrong, but I can't do anything. Addison, they pay my rent. They pay for my car. If I say anything, they will cut me off. Just be careful." She stood up and walked away quickly, head ducked against the wind. I watched her go. A warning. I got back in my car and drove to my grandmother's house. I still had my old key, the one she had given me when I was 16. I wasn't sure if it would work, or if Tessa had changed the locks already. The house sat on a slight rise, a sprawling Victorian with peeling white paint. It wasn't the estate. That was the massive property Tessa lived in, the one Marlene technically owned but let them occupy. This was just Grandma's house. The key turned. The door opened. The house was cold. The heat had been turned down to 55 degrees. It smelled of lavender and stale air. I walked into the study. This was where Marlene spent her days. Her heavy oak desk was usually a chaotic mess of papers, greeting cards, and gardening catalogs. It was completely bare. The surface had been polished to a shine. I opened the top drawer, empty. I opened the side drawers, empty. The address book was gone. The old leather-bound ledger where she tracked her expenses was gone, and on the hook by the window, where she always kept her spare keys on a faded blue ribbon, there was nothing but a small nail hole. They had sanitized it. They had removed every scrap of paper that could prove what she intended. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest. This wasn't just about money anymore. This was erasure. They were rewriting her final days to suit their greed. I needed help. I drove to the law office of Holt and Associates. It wasn't a fancy firm like Huxley and Morrow. It was a strip mall office next to a dry cleaner. Nina Holt was my best friend from high school. She was a paralegal now, sharp-witted and fiercely loyal. "Addison," she shouted when I walked in. She came around the desk and hugged me. I smelled toner and peppermint gum. "I need you to look at something," I said, pulling the copy of the waiver Morrow had given me out of my bag. Nina led me to a back room. She read the document, her brow furrowing. "They want you to waive process? That is fast," she said. "Marlene died." "What, 10 days ago?" "They filed the petition for probate 3 days after the funeral. That is speed of light for this county." "Can you pull the filings?" I asked. Nina logged into the county portal. She tapped away for a moment. "Okay, here it is. Petition for probate. We'll date it October 14th. Witnesses: Jennifer Calloway and Mark Sullen." "I know Mark," I said. "He works at the golf course Graham manages." Nina frowned. "Look at this attached exhibit. It is a capacity letter. Basically, a doctor saying Marlene was of sound mind when she signed the updated will." She turned the screen toward me. It was on letterhead from Pineward Community Clinic, signed by Dr. Eris Thorne. "Pineward?" I said. "That place closed down." Nina nodded. 2 years ago. It is a terrifying urgent care now. "And Dr. Thorne?" "I am pretty sure he retired to Florida." "So the letter is fake?" "Or old," Nina said. "Or recycled. If they used an old letterhead to make it look official. That is fraud. Addison, that is serious." I stared at the screen. The date on the letter was typed. October 12th, 2 days before the will was signed. They were sloppy. I said, "They were arrogant." Nina corrected. "They didn't think anyone would check. They thought you would just take the hit and leave." I left Nina's office with a stack of printed filings and a pit in my stomach. The sun was setting, casting long, bruised shadows across the town square. I decided to try one last time. I wanted to give them a chance to be human. I drove to the estate. The Rowland Ridge estate was beautiful. $2.2 million of stone and glass overlooking the valley. It had been in the Baker family for 3 generations. But Marlene had let Tessa and Graham live there for the last 10 years because they claimed they needed the space for Graham's business entertaining. I parked in the circular driveway. The lights were on. Tessa answered the door. She was wearing an apron over her designer dress, holding a glass of white wine. "Addison," she said, "we are about to have dinner. I just want to talk." "Tessa, for 5 minutes." She sighed and stepped back. "Come in. But keep it brief. Graham is in a mood." We stood in the foyer. The marble floor was cold beneath my boots. "Tessa," I said, keeping my voice low, "I know about the $25,000. Grandma left me voicemails. She was clear. I am not trying to take the house. I am not trying to take your inheritance. I just want what she promised me. It is my safety net. Please, do not make me fight you for this." Tessa took a sip of wine. She looked at me with a pity that felt like a slap. "Addison, you are upset. I get it. Your life has been difficult lately. The divorce, the job situation. It is natural to look for a savior. But Mother did not leave you that money. She changed her mind. She realized that giving you cash would just enable you." "Enable me?" I repeated. "You are unstable." "Darling," she said smoothly, "you ran away to the city, failed, and came crawling back. Mother knew you would just waste it. We are protecting you." The cruelty was breathtaking. It was so precise, targeting my deepest insecurities. "Is that what you told yourself when you typed up the new will?" I asked quietly. "That you were protecting me?" Tessa's eyes narrowed. "Be careful. Addison, you are a guest in this house." I looked around the foyer. The grand staircase, the chandelier. "Actually," I said, "I am pretty sure this was Grandma's house." "Get out," Tessa said. Her voice was no longer soft. I walked out. I drove back to my apartment in the dark. The rage was gone, replaced by a cold, hard clarity. They would not give me the money. They would not admit what they had done. They were banking on my poverty. They thought I couldn't afford a lawyer, couldn't afford to wait, couldn't afford to fight. I sat on my mattress and pulled out my phone. I scrolled back through my saved voicemails. I had 3 from Marlene in the last month. I played the last one. "Addison, it's Grandma. I am tired today. Graham was here again, asking about the accounts. I told him to hush. Listen to me. Sweetheart, I put it where your grandfather wanted it. You know what I mean. Don't let them tell you otherwise. I replayed it. I put it where your grandfather wanted it. My grandfather, Elias Baker, had been a meticulous man. He didn't trust banks, and he didn't trust lawyers. He trusted physical things, land, gold, paper held in your hand. Marlene wasn't talking about a bank transfer. She was talking about something else. I looked at the stack of papers Nina had given me. The fake capacity letter, the rushed probate, the missing keys. If I fought them loudly, they would bury me. They had money, influence, and Warren Morrow. I had nothing but time and an obsessive attention to detail. I opened my laptop. The glow of the screen was the only light in the room. I was not going to sue them, not yet. I was going to document them. I typed out a letter to Warren Morrow. Dear Mr. Morrow, per my rights as a potential heir at law, I am formally requesting copies of all prior testamentary instruments executed by Marlene Baker in the last 10 years. Additionally, I request a full accounting of the estate's assets as they stood on the date of death, and a copy of any trust documents referenced in prior estate plans. Sincerely, Addison Baker. I hit print. The sound of the printer whirring to life sounded like a weapon cocking. They wanted a fight? They wanted to call me unstable? I would show them exactly how stable I was. I would not stop until I understood every single lie they had told. And if that investigation led me to something bigger than $25,000, well, that was their fault. I signed the letter with a black pen, my hand steady. The game had begun. The morning after my letter to Warren Morrow, I drove 40 minutes west to a retirement community called Whispering Pines. I was looking for Eldon Pike, the attorney who had handled the Baker family affairs for 30 years before Graham convinced my grandmother that he was too old-fashioned. Eldon was 82, sitting on his porch, wrapped in a knitted afghan. He didn't look like a high-powered lawyer anymore. He looked like a grandfather waiting for the mail. But his eyes were sharp when I introduced myself. Addison, he said, his voice raspy. Little Addison. I heard about Marlene. A damn shame. She was a stubborn woman, but she had a good heart. I sat on the plastic wicker chair opposite him. I need your help. Eldon, I need to know what was in the will you wrote for her, the one from 5 years ago. Eldon sighed and looked out at the manicured lawn. I cannot give you the file. Addison, attorney-client privilege does not die with the client, and technically, the executor holds the privilege now. That would be your Uncle Graham, I assume? Or Warren Morrow? I said. Eldon grimaced. Morrow, that man treats the law like a vending machine. Shake it hard enough and you get what you want. I leaned forward. They are saying she left me nothing. Eldon. They are saying she updated her will 3 weeks ago and cut me out completely. But she told me, she swore to me, that there was $25,000 set aside. Eldon studied my face. He saw the desperation I was trying to hide. He reached down to a canvas tote bag by his feet. I retired 3 years ago, he said slowly. I sent most of my files to storage, but I kept copies of the ones that worried me. Marlene called me 6 months ago. She was upset. She wanted to know if her old will was still safe. He pulled out a manila envelope and slid it across the small table. This is not an official copy, he said. This is my draft. It has my notes on it. If you ask me in court, I will say I was just showing you some old paperwork to help you grieve. I opened the envelope. There it was, in black and white, dated 5 years prior. To my granddaughter, Addison Baker. I give and bequeath the sum of $25,000 to be paid from the general assets of my estate. It was real. I wasn't crazy, but there was something else. In the margin, in Eldon's cramped, spidery handwriting, there was a note. Client references separate instrument regarding marital assets. Check safe deposit box 404. What is this? I asked, pointing to the note. What is a separate instrument? Eldon frowned. Marlene was married before she met your grandfather Baker. Just briefly, a man named Silas. He died young. She never talked about him much, but she always insisted there was property or a bond tied to that marriage that she wanted to keep separate from the Baker estate. She called it her rainy day fund. She wanted to make sure Graham couldn't touch it. Does it still exist? Eldon shrugged. If Morrow did his job, he would have rolled everything into the new will. But if Marlene was smart, and she was, she might have kept it off the books. I thanked him and left, clutching the envelope like it was a shield. I had proof of her intent. It wasn't legal proof that the new will was fake, but it was moral proof. She hadn't forgotten me. I drove back to town and went straight to Nina's office. Nina was already deep in research, her desk covered in printouts. "You look like you found gold," Nina said, eyeing the envelope. "Better," I said. "I found history." I showed her the will and the note about the separate instrument. Nina scanned it, nodding. "Okay, so we know she wanted you to have the money, but we need to prove the new will is invalid. And I found something weird about the house." She turned her monitor toward me. It showed the property records for the Rowland Ridge estate. "The house is valued at $2.2 million, Nina said. "But look at the title history. It has been refinanced 4 times in the last 10 years. Graham and Tessa were pulling equity out of it like it was an ATM. I felt a cold knot in my stomach. Grandma let them live there. She didn't know they were mortgaging it. She had to sign off on it. Nina said, or someone did, "But look at this. 6 months ago, there was a lien release. A private lender called Ironwood Holdings released a lien of $400,000 against the property, but there is no record of the payoff. No money moved out of Marlene's known accounts to pay it. So how did they pay it?" I asked. "Exactly," Nina said. "And here's the kicker. Ironwood Holdings? It is a shell company registered in Delaware. It dissolves 3 weeks after the lien release. It smells like debt shuffling. Addison. Like they moved debt around to make the estate look solvent so they could get a new loan." I stared at the screen. My aunt and uncle weren't just greedy. They were drowning. They needed the estate not to preserve the legacy, but to cover their tracks. "I need to check the capacity letter," I said. If they were desperate enough to shuffle liens, they were desperate enough to fake a doctor's note. I drove to the address listed on the capacity letter for Pinewood Community Clinic. It was on the outskirts of town, a low brick building that had seen better days. When I pulled up, the parking lot was empty except for a dumpster and a contractor's van. The sign above the door didn't say Pinewood Community Clinic, it said Cedar Hollow Urgent Dental. I walked inside. The waiting room smelled of antiseptic and drilling. The receptionist looked up, startled. "Can I help you? I am looking for Dr. Eris Thorne." I said. She blinked. "Dr. Thorne? Honey, this building was sold 2 years ago. It used to be a general clinic, but Dr. Thorne passed away." My heart hammered against my ribs. "Passed away? When?" 3 years ago." She said. "Heart attack. Why?" I felt lightheaded. The capacity letter attached to the probate filing, the letter swearing my grandmother was of sound mind on October 12th of this year, was signed by a man who had been dead for 3 years. They hadn't just forged it. They had been lazy about it. They must have found an old letter in her files, scanned it, and changed the date, not realizing the doctor was gone. "Thank you," I whispered. I walked back to my car. My hands were shaking so hard I couldn't get the key in the ignition. This wasn't a family dispute anymore. This was a felony. I needed to see where the money went. I had $4,000 in my savings account, my entire life savings. I drove to the office of Calder and Brigg Financial. They were the most reputable accountants in the county. I asked to see a forensic accountant. It cost me $2,000 just to open the file. It felt like physically bleeding, handing over that check. But I needed eyes on the bank statements Nina had helped me pull from the probate record. I met with a junior accountant named Sarah. She was young, serious, and fast. I reviewed the last 6 months of activity on Mrs. Baker's primary checking account, Sarah said, tapping a spreadsheet. Most of it is standard. Utilities, taxes, groceries. But starting in May, there is a recurring transfer that stands out. She highlighted a column in yellow. Every 2 weeks. $3,000 was transferred to an entity called Harborlight Heritage Fund. The memo line always says, charitable donation. That is a lot of money. I said, Grandma was generous, but she gave to the animal shelter and the library. She didn't send $3,000 bi-weekly to anyone. It totals nearly $40,000 in 6 months. Sarah said, and here's the red flag. I looked up Harborlight Heritage Fund. It is a registered nonprofit, but its operating address is a P.O. box in the same building as your uncle's lawyer. Warren Morrow. Morrow. I said, it gets worse, Sarah continued. I can't see their internal books, obviously, but looking at the transaction codes, the money hits Harborlight and then immediately moves. It doesn't sit. It is a pass-through. They are draining her accounts, I said. They were draining them before she even died, and calling it charity to get the tax write-off. Sarah added, it is smart, in a criminal sort of way. I left the accountant's office feeling heavy. The scope of it was overwhelming. They had built a machine to consume my grandmother's life. 2 days later, there was a memorial brunch. It was held at the country club. I wasn't explicitly invited, but I wasn't explicitly banned, either. I put on my black dress and went. The room was full of people eating mini quiches and drinking mimosas. Graham stood near the fireplace, holding a glass of scotch. He looked the part of the grieving son perfectly, somber, dignified, receiving condolences with a brave nod. I watched him from the edge of the room. I saw him talking to the town mayor. It was a blessing, really. I heard Graham say, but the costs. You have no idea. The in-home care, the specialists. It wiped us out. There was nothing left at the end, but we did what we had to do. He was planting the narrative. He was telling everyone there was no money, so that when I complained about getting nothing, I would look like a greedy scavenger trying to squeeze blood from a stone. I saw Warren Morrow near the buffet. He was eating a shrimp skewer. Mr. Morrow, I said, walking up to him. Addison, he said, wiping his mouth with a napkin. Surprised to see you here. I have a question about the estate. I said, keeping my voice pleasant. This is hardly the time. I am curious about the Harborlight Heritage Fund. I said. Morrow stopped chewing. His eyes didn't move, but the skin around them tightened. What about it? Grandma donated nearly $40,000 to them in the last 6 months. I said, that is a lot of charity for a woman who was supposedly confused. I would love to see the donation receipts. For my own tax records, of course, if I am to understand the estate's value. Morrow took a step closer to me. He smelled of cologne and shrimp. Marlene was a generous woman, he said smoothly. Harborlight does excellent work preserving local history. What history? I asked. They don't have a website. They just have a P.O. box in your building. Morrow smiled, and it was the scariest thing I had seen all week. You are digging. Addison, I understand. You are grieving, and you are broke, and you are looking for someone to blame. But be very careful. If you drag this into court, I will bury you in legal fees. I will depose you and ask about your divorce. I will ask about the time you were fired from that marketing job in Philly. I will make your life very public and very ugly. And in the end, you will still get nothing because the will is ironclad. He patted my shoulder. It felt like a threat. Enjoy the brunch, he said. I left the room, my heart racing. He knew about my job in Philly. He had done his research on me. I went to the restroom to splash water on my face. When I came out, my cousin Lila was waiting in the hallway. She looked terrified. Meet me at the diner on Route 9. She whispered, tonight, 7 o'clock. She hurried away before I could answer. The diner was a neon-lit box of chrome and grease. I sat in a booth in the back. Lila slid in opposite me 10 minutes late, wearing a hoodie pulled up over her hair. She ordered a coffee and didn't touch it. They are scared, Lila said. Who? Mom and Dad. After you left the other day, Mom started freaking out. She kept asking Dad if he had found the recording. What recording? I asked. I don't know. But they were tearing the house apart, Dad kept saying. She was senile. It doesn't matter. But Mom was crying. She said, if Addison finds the library tape, we are done. The library tape, I repeated. Lila looked at her hands, and they talked about the old trust. They said Morrow promised he killed it, but they aren't sure. Addison, I shouldn't be telling you this. If they find out, they won't. I said. I grabbed her hand. Lila, look at me. They are stealing. They forged a doctor's signature. This isn't just family drama. It is prison time. You need to decide which side you are on. Lila pulled her hand away. I can't. They pay for my insulin. Addison, I can't lose my insurance. She stood up, dropped a $5 bill on the table, and ran out. I sat there for a long time. The library tape. Marlene loved the library. She volunteered there for 20 years. If she had something to say, something she didn't want Graham to hear, she wouldn't say it at home. I thought about the empty desk drawers at her house. They had taken everything, but Marlene was clever. She played hide and seek with me when I was a kid. She always said, if you want to hide something, put it where people are too lazy to look. I paid the bill and drove to the U-Store facility on the south side of town. Marlene had a small unit there for seasonal decorations. I prayed she hadn't given the key to Graham. I still had my key ring from when I helped her move Christmas boxes last year. The small brass key was there. The facility was deserted. The corrugated metal door rattled as I rolled it up. The unit was full of plastic bins labeled Xmas and Easter. It smelled of dust and mothballs. I started digging. I didn't know what I was looking for. A tape? A cassette? I opened a box labeled linens. Nothing. I opened a box labeled kitchen overflow. Nothing. Then I saw it. A shoebox on the top shelf, shoved behind a plastic wreath. It was labeled recipe cards. Marlene didn't use recipe cards. She cooked from memory. I pulled the box down. Inside, there were no index cards. There was a tangle of old cassette tapes and mini discs. My grandmother had held on to her old recorder from the 90s. I sifted through them. Choir practice 1998. Bird calls. Addison's piano recital. And then, at the bottom, a micro-cassette tape. It had a sticky note taped to the plastic case. For Addison, if they try it. The date written on the label was October 1st, 2 weeks before she died. I didn't have a micro-cassette player. I sat on the concrete floor of the storage unit, holding the tiny tape in my hand, feeling the weight of it. I drove to an electronics pawn shop that was still open. I bought a dusty recorder for $20. I sat in my car in the parking lot and put the tape in. I pressed play. There was a hiss of static. Then, my grandmother's voice. She sounded tired, her breath catching in her chest. But she was lucid. She was sharp. Addison, if you are listening to this, I am gone. And if you are listening to this, it means Graham and Tessa have done what they threatened to do. I closed my eyes. Tears pricked my lids. They have been at me for weeks. Marlene's voice continued, badgering me about the house, saying they need to refinance again. I told them no. I told them I am leaving the money to you, to get you started. They got angry. Graham shouted, "It scares me." "Honey, I don't feel safe in my own house." There was a pause, a sound of paper rustling. "So I went to the library today. I couldn't go to Eldon, and I don't trust Morrow. I wrote a codicil, a simple update. It says the $25,000 goes to you, and it references the trust your grandfather Silas set up. I had it notarized at the front desk by the nice girl. Sarah, I didn't file it with Morrow. I am scared he would burn it. I am going to hide it." The tape clicked off. I sat in the silence of the car. She had been scared. They had bullied a dying woman, a codicil, notarized at the library. That was the key. A codicil is a legal amendment to a will. If she executed it properly, it could override the fake will, or at least prove that her intent was contrary to what Morrow was peddling. I wiped my face. I was done being sad. I was done being the victim. I needed a lawyer who wasn't afraid of Warren Morrow. I couldn't afford a high-priced firm, but I had a case now. I had evidence. I looked up Sloane Merritt. I had heard her name from Nina. Sloane was new in town, a transfer from Chicago who had burned out on corporate law and opened a solo practice. Nina said she was aggressive and bored. I called her office the next morning. I didn't ask for an appointment. I said I had evidence of estate fraud involving the Rowland family. She saw me at noon. Sloane Merritt was 40, with sharp features and glasses that she took off to rub the bridge of her nose. Her office was messy, stacked with books, which I liked. It meant she worked. I played the tape for her. When it finished, Sloane leaned back in her chair. She looked at me. "That is powerful," she said, "but it is hearsay unless we find the document." "She mentions a notary," I said. "At the library?" Sloane nodded. "Notary logs are public records. If she signed something, the notary had to log it. Date, time, type of document. If we find the log entry, does it prove the will Morrow has is fake?" Sloane tapped her pen on the desk. "No, but it proves there is a competing document, and if the date of the codicil is close to the date of the Morrow will, it creates a fact pattern, especially if we combine it with the dead doctor on the capacity letter. That," she pointed a finger at me, "is our smoking gun. The dead doctor gets us in the door. The tape keeps us in the room." She looked at me, assessing me. "I am expensive. Addison. Usually, I have $2,000 left," I said, "and a $25,000 claim. And I think the estate is worth $2.2 million. And I think they stole it." Sloane smiled. It was a predatory smile, but for the first time, I felt like the predator was on my side. "I will take the $2,000 as a retainer," she said. "We will work on a contingency for the rest. If we prove fraud, we don't just get your 25 grand. We petition to remove Graham as executor. We petition for restitution. We burn the whole house down." She stood up and extended her hand. "Let's go to the library." I shook her hand. My grip was firm. We were going to reopen probate, and we were going to catch them in the lie. The Cedar Hollow Public Library was a sanctuary of silence and dust motes dancing in the shafts of afternoon light. It was the kind of place where time seemed to slow down, trapped in the smell of binding glue and floor wax. I walked in with Sloane Merritt, my heels clicking too loudly on the linoleum. We were not there to read. We were there to hunt. "We need the notary log for October 1st, Sloane told the head librarian. A woman named Mrs. Higgins who wore her glasses on a chain around her neck. "We are verifying a signature for the Baker estate." Mrs. Higgins looked at Sloane's business card, then at me. "I was so sorry to hear about Marlene," she said softly. "She was our best volunteer for the Wednesday reading circle." "Thank you," I said. I felt a pang of guilt. I was using my grandmother's memory as a battering ram, but I had no choice. Mrs. Higgins retrieved a thick black-bound ledger from a locked cabinet behind the desk. She opened it to October. The pages were filled with handwritten entries, car title transfers, mortgage documents, affidavits. Sloane ran her finger down the list. "Here," she whispered. I looked where she pointed. October 1st, 11:15 in the morning, Marlene Baker. My heart kicked against my ribs. She was here. The tape was real. But then I looked at the column labeled document type. It did not say codicil. It did not say will amendment. It said supplemental directive. "What is a supplemental directive?" I asked. Sloane frowned. "It is vague. It could mean a healthcare directive, a letter of instruction, or a modification to a trust. It is a catch-all term. It is not as legally specific as we hoped." She looked at the signature next to the entry. It was Marlene's, firm, familiar, and undeniably hers. And next to it, the notary's signature, Sarah Jenkins. "Is Sarah working today?" Sloane asked Mrs. Higgins. "Sarah moved to Oregon last week." Mrs. Higgins said, "Her husband got a transfer." Of course she did. I thought, the universe seemed determined to erase every footprint my grandmother had made. Sloane took a picture of the log entry with her phone. "It is not a home run," Sloane said as we walked back to the car, "but it is a base hit. It proves she executed a legal document 2 weeks before she died, a document that Warren Morrow did not produce. If Morrow claims the October 14th will is the only valid instrument, he has to explain what happened to the October 1st directive. What if they destroyed it?" I asked. "Then we have a problem," Sloane said. "But destruction of a testamentary instrument is a felony. And if we can prove they knew about it, The court will infer that its contents were favorable to you. I am filing a motion to preserve evidence immediately. It puts them on notice. If they shred anything now, they go to jail. The next morning, the reaction came. I was at my apartment, trying to heat up leftover coffee, when there was a knock at the door. I expected my landlord, asking about the rent. I was barely managing to pay. It was Tessa. She stood in the hallway, looking out of place in her camel hair coat and designer boots. She held a foil-wrapped dish in her hands. "Can I come in?" she asked. Her voice was strained, tight with forced civility. I stepped back. She walked into my tiny living room, her eyes darting over the peeling wallpaper and the mattress on the floor. She did not comment on it, which was worse than if she had. "I brought lasagna," she said, setting the dish on my wobbly kitchen table. "I know you have been busy. I thought you might need a home-cooked meal." I stared at the lasagna. It smelled of garlic and tomato, a scent that reminded me of Sunday dinners when I was a child, before everything went wrong. "What do you want, Tessa?" I asked. She sighed and sat on one of my folding chairs. She looked tired. The makeup around her eyes was heavy, concealing dark circles. "We received a letter from your lawyer," she said. "Ms. Merritt." She filed a motion. I said, "Addison, this has to stop." She clasped her hands on the table. "Graham is furious. He is talking about countersuing you for harassment. He says you are tarnishing Marlene's memory by dragging her private affairs into the public record. I am trying to find the truth." I said, "The truth is that you are hurting the family," Tessa said sharply. Then she softened her tone. "Look, I know you are struggling. I see how you are living. It breaks my heart. Really, you are my niece. I don't want to see you destitute." She reached into her purse and pulled out a checkbook. "Graham and I talked. We want to help you. We know Marlene would have wanted you to be comfortable." She wrote quickly, tore off the check, and slid it across the table. $5,000. "It is a gift," she said. "A peace offering. You take this. You pay off your debts. Maybe you move back to the city where there are more jobs. We just want you to be happy." I looked at the check. $5,000. It was enough to buy a bed. It was enough to fix my car. Then I saw the document she pulled out next. It was a single page, stapled. "We just need you to sign this receipt," she said casually. "Just for our tax records." I picked up the paper. It wasn't a receipt. It was a settlement and release agreement. I read the second paragraph. "In exchange for the sum of $5,000, the undersigned hereby waives all claims, known and unknown, against the estate of Marlene Baker, and agrees to keep the terms of this agreement strictly confidential." It was a gag order and a buyout. I looked up at Tessa. Her eyes were wide, pleading, but behind the pleading was a hard, flinty calculation. "You are scared," I said softly. Tessa stiffened. "Don't be ridiculous. You are scared because I found the notary log." I said, "You know there is another document. You know the will you filed is a lie." Tessa stood up, the chair scraping loudly against the floor. "You are ungrateful. We are trying to save you from embarrassing yourself. Take your check," I said, "and take your lasagna. Addison, you are making a mistake. Morrow will destroy you. Get out," I said. She snatched the check off the table. She didn't take the lasagna. She marched out, slamming the door so hard the window pane rattled. I stood there, shaking. For the first time, I felt real fear. This wasn't just a family squabble anymore. They were organized. They had a strategy. They had pre-printed legal releases ready to go. They were treating me like an insurgent that needed to be quelled. I threw the lasagna in the trash. I couldn't eat it. It felt like poison. My sleep unraveled after that. Every time a car drove slowly down Main Street, I went to the window to see if it was Graham. I put a chair under my doorknob at night, but I had to keep working. I needed money to pay Sloane's court fees. I picked up extra shifts at Hollow and Vine, an organic market downtown. I spent my days stacking apples and slicing artisan cheese for women who drove the same kind of cars as my aunt. It was humbling, and it was exhausting. My feet ached. My hands smelled of sanitizer and onions, but the physical labor kept my mind from spinning out of control. One Tuesday, while I was stocking the wine shelf. Nina came in. She looked frantic. "I have been texting you." She said, "My phone is off. I am saving battery." I said, "Come to the car." She said, "Now." We sat in her sedan in the loading dock. Nina pulled out a file folder. I followed the money. She said, "You know Harbor Light Heritage Fund? The charity Morrow said Marlene was donating to?" "The pass-through." I said, "I pulled their incorporation papers from the state database." Nina said, "The registered agent is Warren Morrow, but look at the initial board of directors." She pointed to a list of names: Warren Morrow, Samuel P. Brigg, Tessa Rowland. My aunt was on the board. She is donating to herself. I said, "It is worse." Nina said, "I cross-referenced the address. The suite number listed for Harbor Light doesn't exist. It is a utility closet in Morrow's building, but the bank account attached to it? It is held at a branch in Delaware." And I found a transfer. Nina said, "A big one. 2 days after Marlene died. Harbor Light transferred $12,000 to a construction company called Apex Renovations." "Apex," I said, "that is the company doing the roof on the Rowland estate." "Bingo," Nina said. "They used Marlene's money, funneled it through a fake charity, and used it to fix the roof of the house they are about to inherit. That is embezzlement. Addison, that is theft." I stared at the paper. It was so clean on the page, so black and white. "But we need to prove the money came from Marlene originally." I said, "We need the bank records." Nina said, "The official ones." That night, I went back to the paperwork Eldon Pike had given me. The old will. The note about the separate instrument. Check safe deposit box 404. I didn't have access to the box. The bank wouldn't let me in without a court order or an executor's key. But I had the inventory list Eldon had slipped into the envelope. It was 5 years old. But it was a lead. I scanned the list of contents: birth certificates, marriage license, Baker, marriage license, Vance. Vance, that was the name of her first husband. Silas Vance. I searched the name online. Silas Vance had died in 1972. He was a land surveyor. I searched Silas Vance land deed. Nothing. Then I searched Silas Vance trust. A hit came up in an old legal notice from a newspaper archive. Notice of trust formation. The Vance Baker Land Trust. Trustee: Marlene Baker. It existed. I called Sloan. "We need to find out what is in the Vance Baker Land Trust." I said, "Eldon said it was a separate instrument. If it is separate, it might not be part of the probate estate. Graham might not even know it exists. Or he does," Sloan said. "And that is what he is trying to hide." 2 days later, I came home from a double shift at the market. My legs were heavy, my back throbbing. There was a plain white envelope taped to my apartment door. No stamp, no return address, just my name, written in block letters. I took it inside and opened it with a kitchen knife. It contained a single photocopy. It was a mortgage statement from a lender called Oakhaven Capital. The borrower was listed as Marlene Baker. The property address was Rowland Ridge Estate. The statement date was August of this year. It showed a principal balance of $400,000. But the most chilling part was the signature block at the bottom of the refinancing agreement, which was included on the second page. Marlene Elizabeth Baker. I stared at the signature. It was shaky. It looked like an old woman's handwriting. But the slant was wrong. Marlene was left-handed. Her letters always leaned slightly backward. To the left. This signature leaned to the right. Aggressively. I grabbed a sample of Graham's handwriting. A birthday card he had sent me 3 years ago that I had kept in a shoebox. "Happy birthday. Addison. Uncle Graham." The G in Graham had a distinct, sharp loop at the top. I looked at the B in Baker on the mortgage document. It had the same sharp loop. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just influence. This wasn't just pressuring an old woman to sign a check. This was forgery. Someone had signed my grandmother's name to a $400,000 loan 3 months before she died. I called Nina. "Bring your magnifying glass." I said. We met at my kitchen table. Nina laid out 3 genuine signatures from Marlene, from birthday cards and old checks. She laid the photocopy from the envelope next to them. Look at the pressure points, Nina said, shining a flashlight on the paper. Marlene's hand was weak. The ink is usually lighter on the upstroke. She pointed to the mortgage signature. This is heavy all the way through, she said. The person who wrote this was pressing down hard. They were trying to go slow, to mimic the shakiness. But the muscle memory took over on the slant. It leans right, I said, just like Graham's. Nina whispered. If Graham signed this, I said, then the mortgage is fraudulent. The lien on the house is invalid. And if the lien is invalid, Nina said, the bank can foreclose, or the estate is liable for fraud. Who sent this? I asked, looking at the envelope. Someone who has access to Graham's papers. Nina said, someone who is scared. Lila. I took the mortgage statement to Sloane the next morning. Her face went hard when she saw it. This changes the venue, she said. We are not just in probate court anymore. This is criminal. She picked up the phone. I am filing for an emergency deposition of Warren Morrow and Graham Rowland. I am attaching this document as Exhibit A. We are going to allege that the estate's assets are being dissipated through fraud. Morrow fought back immediately. He filed a motion to quash the deposition, claiming it was a harassing fishing expedition by a disgruntled potential heir. He argued that the mortgage document was unverified hearsay and likely a fabrication itself. We went before Judge Calloway 3 days later. The courtroom was old, smelling of wood polish and anxiety. Warren Morrow stood in a suit that cost more than my annual salary. He looked confident. Your Honor, he boomed. Ms. Baker has no standing. She is not a beneficiary. She is wasting the court's time with conspiracy theories because she is unhappy with her grandmother's final wishes. Sloane stood up. She was smaller than Morrow, but she was sharper. Your Honor, we have presented a notary log that contradicts the timeline of the will. We have presented a mortgage document that appears to contain a forged signature of the decedent. We are not asking to overturn the will today. We are asking for limited discovery to determine if the assets of the estate are being looted. Judge Calloway looked at the documents. He adjusted his glasses. Mr. Morrow, he said, the discrepancy in the notary log is concerning, and this signature. He held up the photocopy. It does appear markedly different from the exemplars provided. Morrow stiffened. That is a copy of a copy. Your Honor, it is unreliable. Then produce the original, the judge said. I grant the request for limited discovery. Judge Calloway ruled. The executor shall produce all original loan documents, the original will, and all bank records for the 6 months prior to death within 10 days, and Mr. Rowland will make himself available for deposition. Morrow's face turned a mottled red. We walked out of the courtroom feeling the adrenaline crash. It was a win, a small one, but a win. But the Rowlands were not done. That evening, as I was unlocking my bike outside the market, a shadow detached itself from the alley wall. I flinched, dropping my keys. It was Lila. She was shaking, her face pale under the streetlights. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Addison, she rasped. Lila, I said, did you send the envelope? She nodded frantically. I found it in Dad's home office. He left it on the printer. You have to tell the truth. Lila, I said, you have to tell the lawyers what you know. I can't, she sobbed. He will kill me, not literally, but he will destroy my life. He said if I talk, I am out. No apartment, no car, no insulin. He said I would be on the street like you. I stepped closer to her. Lila, listen to me. He forged her signature. That is a crime. If you help him hide it, you are an accessory. Lila collapsed onto the pavement, sitting with her knees pulled to her chest. She buried her face in her hands. It wasn't just the mortgage, she whispered. What do you mean? The will, she said. The updated will. I froze. What about it? I signed it, she said. My breath caught. You witnessed it? No, she wailed. I didn't witness anything. Grandma wasn't even there. I stared at her. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Explain, I said. Dad called me into the kitchen, she said, her voice muffled by her knees. It was 2 days after Grandma died. 2 days after, he had a stack of papers. He said, "We found an updated draft, but it wasn't finalized. We need to fix it to protect the house." "He made you sign as a witness?" I asked. "He told me to sign where the sticky note was." She said, "He said it was just a formality. He said if I didn't do it, the state would take the house and we would all be homeless." I was scared. "Addison, I just signed it. So the witnesses listed on the will, Jennifer Calloway and Mark Sullen. They weren't there?" "Mark works for Dad," Lila said, "and Jennifer is his girlfriend. They signed it later. Marlene never saw that document." I looked down at my cousin. She was broken. She was a victim of her father's bullying just as much as I was. But she was also the key. "Lila," I said gently, "you have to tell this to Sloan." "No, no, no," she pleaded. "If you tell us," I said, "we can protect you. We can ask for immunity. But if Morrow finds out you told me, and you don't go on the record, he will throw you under the bus to save himself. He will say you forged it." Lila looked up at me, her eyes wide with terror. "He would do that? He is a shark." "Lila. And Graham is drowning. They will sacrifice anyone to stay afloat." I helped her up. "Come with me." We sat in my apartment for 3 hours. Lila cried. She drank tea. And finally, she let me record a voice memo on my phone, confessing everything. When she left, I sat in the dark. The strategy had changed. I wasn't looking for $25,000 anymore. I wasn't looking for a fair share. The will was a total fabrication. The mortgage was a forgery. The charity was a money laundering scheme. They had used my grandmother's name to steal a $2.2 million estate, and they had done it by exploiting a dead woman and terrifying a sick girl. I called Sloan. It was midnight. "Pick up," I whispered. She picked up on the second ring. "Merritt, we have a witness." I said, "Lila just confessed. The will was signed 2 days after Marlene died." There was a silence on the line. Then I heard the sound of a lamp clicking on. "Addison," Sloan said, her voice crisp and awake. "This is it. We are not settling." I said, "No," Sloan said. "We are definitely not settling. If the will is void." I said, "What happens?" "If the will is void," Sloan said, "we revert to the prior valid will, the one Eldon Pike wrote, but because of the fraud, because of the dissipation of assets, we can ask the court for more. We can ask for a constructive trust." What does that mean? It means we ask the judge to seize the assets they stole, the house, the accounts, everything, and hold it in trust for the rightful heirs. And we argue that because they acted with malice, they forfeit their rights to inherit. "We can take it all?" I asked. Sloane's voice was dark. "If we play this right, Addison, we don't just take the estate, we take their future. We take the house they are living in. We take the ground beneath their feet. Do it," I said. I hung up. I walked to the window and looked out at the sleeping town. Somewhere on the hill, in the big house overlooking the valley, Graham and Tessa were sleeping, thinking they were safe, thinking their $5,000 check and their intimidation tactics had worked. They didn't know that the girl from the florist shop and the paralegal and the scared cousin had just dismantled their entire life. I wasn't scared anymore. I was cold, and I was ready to burn it down. The cardboard boxes of discovery documents arrived at Sloane's office on a Tuesday afternoon. They were heavy, smelling of toner and industrial adhesive, stacked 3 high against the wall. Warren Morrow had complied with the judge's order, but he had done it in the most obstructionist way possible. A document dump, thousands of pages of unsorted financial records, emails, and medical notes, all mixed together to bury the truth in a blizzard of paper. Sloane rolled up her sleeves. "We are going to need coffee," she said. For the next 3 days, we lived in that conference room. We sorted, we cataloged, we highlighted, and slowly, the picture of my grandmother's final months began to emerge. Not as the peaceful decline the Rowlands claimed, but as a chaotic scramble for cash. The inconsistencies were subtle at first, then glaring. "Look at this," I said, sliding a stack of receipts across the table. "These are the donation receipts for the Harbor Light Heritage Fund." Sloane adjusted her glasses. What about them? There are 12 of them, I said, dated once a month for the last year, but look at the timestamp code at the very bottom edge. The faint digital footprint from the printer. Sloane squinted. They are all the same. They were all printed in a single batch. I said, on October 25th, 10 days after Grandma died. They generated a year's worth of paper trail in 5 minutes to cover the transfers. Sloane pulled a bank statement from another pile. And look at the electronic transfer logs. The bank's internal system shows the original memo line for these transfers was blank. Then, on October 26th, someone with administrative access, likely Graham, since he had power of attorney, went in and edited the memo fields to read charitable gift. They were rewriting history. I said, Sloane brought in the experts the following week. We hired a forensic accountant named David Chen and a handwriting analyst named Dr. Eliza Vance. No relation to my grandfather's family. Just a coincidence that felt like a nod from the universe. Dr. Vance spent 2 hours with the original mortgage documents Morrow had finally surrendered. She used a microscope and a light box. When she looked up, her expression was grim. It is a simulation, she said. A high-quality forgery, likely done by tracing a projection or using a light box. The tremor in the signature is rhythmic, artificial. A natural tremor from age or illness is chaotic. This was drawn by a steady hand pretending to shake. And the accountant? David Chen projected a spreadsheet onto the wall. It is a circle, he said, tracing a line with a laser pointer. Money leaves Marlene's primary savings. It goes to Harborlight. Harborlight pays a consulting fee to a shell company called Ridge Management. Ridge Management pays the mortgage on the Rowland estate and the contractor. Apex Renovations. They were using her money to pay their mortgage. I said, technically, they were using her money to prevent foreclosure. David corrected. The Rowland estate was 90 days past due on its payments in August. If they hadn't raided Marlene's accounts, the bank would have taken the house before she even died. I sat back in my chair. The cruelty of it took my breath away. They didn't just steal an inheritance. They cannibalized her safety to protect their status. They lived in a mansion they couldn't afford, and they fed my grandmother to the bank to keep the lights on. We have enough, Sloane said. Her voice was hard steel. We are not just defending anymore. We are attacking. But the Rowlands were not sitting idle while we built our case in the quiet of the law library. Tessa was fighting a war in the living rooms of Cedar Hollow. It started with a phone call from my cousin Sarah. On my mother's side, we used to be close. Addison, Sarah said, her voice cool. I am just calling to let you know we are moving Mom's 70th birthday party to Tessa's house this year. Oh, I said, okay, I can bring the cake. Actually, Sarah said, maybe it is better if you don't come. I froze. Why? Tessa told us what is happening. Addison, she told us about the lawsuit. She said you are suing the estate because you are broke. She said you are unwell. Unwell? I repeated. She said the divorce really broke you, Sarah whispered. She said you are lashing out at the family because you are grieving and unstable. We just think, maybe you need space. We don't want a scene at the party. I gripped the phone so hard the plastic creaked. She is lying. Sarah, they forged a will. They stole millions. Sarah sighed. See? This is what she meant. You sound paranoid. Addie, just take care of yourself. The line went dead. It didn't stop there. I walked into the pharmacy, and Mrs. Gable, who had known me since kindergarten, turned her back to me in the aisle. I waved at a neighbor, and he looked down at his shoes. Tessa had painted a masterpiece of a narrative. The tragic, unstable niece attacking the grieving, benevolent aunt and uncle. She had weaponized their social standing against my isolation. Then came the letter from my landlord. Mr. Henderson was a decent man. He had let me pay my deposit in 2 installments, but the letter under my door was formal and typed. Dear Ms. Baker, due to rising property taxes and insurance costs, the rent for Unit 2B will increase by $400 a month, effective immediately. If you cannot meet this adjustment, please vacate within 30 days. $400. It was a 70% increase. I went downstairs to the dusty office behind the florist shop. Mr. Henderson wouldn't look me in the eye. Why? I asked. You just raised it last year. Insurance, he mumbled. Shuffling papers. High-risk tenants drive up premiums. High risk? I asked. I have never missed a payment. I got a call. Addison, he snapped. Finally looking up. A courtesy call. Someone warned me that you are involved in some heavy litigation, that there might be judgments against you, that you might not be reliable. I can't afford a tenant who gets evicted by a court order. Graham, I thought, or Morrow. They were squeezing me. They wanted to make me homeless so I would have to settle. I am not leaving, I said quietly, and I will pay the rent. But you tell whoever called you that I am not high risk. I am the safest bet in this town because I am the only one telling the truth. I went back upstairs. I looked at my bank account. I had $1,200. The rent increase would wipe me out in 2 months. I called Sloan. File it. I said, file the petition. Sloan didn't hesitate. The next morning, she filed a petition to reopen probate and revoke letters testamentary. We attached the affidavit from the handwriting expert, the analysis of the Harbor Light transfers, and the notary log from the library. We also filed a notice of suspected fraud with the county clerk, effectively putting a red flag on the Rowland Estates title. The reaction was nuclear. 3 days later, a process server handed me a thick envelope outside the grocery store where I was working. Counterclaim for defamation, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and tortious interference with inheritance. The plaintiffs were Graham and Tessa Rowland. They were suing me for $500,000 in damages. They claimed my baseless accusations had caused them severe anxiety, social embarrassment, and potential business losses for Graham's consulting firm. They are trying to bury you, Sloan said, tossing the claim onto her desk. This is a SLAP suit, strategic lawsuit against public participation. It is designed to intimidate you into silence. It is working, I said, looking at the legal fees outlined in the demand. If I lose, I will owe them $500,000. I will be bankrupt for the rest of my life. That is the point, Sloan said. They want you to fold. They want you to sign a settlement just to make this go away. Are you going to fold? I thought about the empty desk drawers at my grandmother's house. I thought about the fake charity. I thought about Lila. Terrified in the dark. No, I said, but I needed money. The legal fight was getting expensive, even with Sloan's contingency arrangement for the big win. There were filing fees, expert witness retainers, transcript costs. I looked out the window at my Honda Civic. It was the last thing of value I owned. I sold it the next day to a used car lot on the highway. I got $4,000 for it. It hurt. That car was my freedom. It was my escape pod. I bought a second-hand bicycle for $80 and a heavy waterproof coat. Cedar Hollow is hilly. The ride to the market was 3 miles, mostly uphill. The ride to Sloan's office was 4. November turned into December. The wind cut through my gloves. My legs burned. I arrived at work sweating and cold at the same time, my hair plastered to my forehead. People stared. In a town where everyone drove SUVs, a 33-year-old woman riding a bike in the freezing rain was a spectacle. It reinforced Tessa's narrative that I was unstable. Look at her. I imagined them saying, she has lost her mind. But I hadn't lost my mind. I was finding my spine. Every rotation of the pedals was a refusal to quit. Every time the icy wind slapped my face, I thought of Graham signing my grandmother's name, and I pedaled harder. Then, a crack appeared in their wall. It came in the form of a LinkedIn message to Sloan. I have information about the Baker file. I cannot meet at the office, library, backstack. Tuesday, 6 p.m. It was from Raphael Strickland. I knew the name. He was a junior bookkeeper at Huxley and Morrow. I had seen him once in the lobby. A young guy in an ill-fitting suit who looked like he was afraid of his own shadow. Sloan and I went to the library. We stood in the biographies section, pretending to browse. Raphael appeared between the shelves. He looked nervous, clutching a reusable grocery bag. "You are Addison?" he asked, looking at me. "Yes." He handed Sloan a flash drive. "I am quitting tomorrow," he whispered. I got a job in Pittsburgh. I can't stay there. He is scrubbing the servers. Scrubbing? Sloan asked sharply. He ordered it to delete all emails older than 6 months, Raphael said, but I made a backup of the HarborLight folder before they did. What is in it? I asked. Emails between Morrow and your uncle, Raphael said, and one from Tessa. They call HarborLight the buffer. There's an email from Graham dated 2 weeks before your grandmother died. He asks, is the buffer ready to receive the equity transfer? And Morrow replies, cleaning the file now. The old lady won't know a thing. My blood ran cold. The old lady won't know a thing. Thank you. I said, why are you doing this? Raphael looked at me, then at his shoes. My mom had dementia. If someone did to her what they did to Mrs. Baker, I couldn't sleep. He walked away quickly, disappearing into the stacks. We went back to Sloane's office and plugged in the drive. The emails were there. They were damning. They laid out the conspiracy in plain text. They discussed the timing of the will, the need to manage Lila, and the specific amounts needed to pay off the renovation debts. This is it, Sloane said, her face illuminated by the blue light of the monitor. This is malice. She filed a supplemental brief in support of petition the next morning, attaching the emails. Judge Calloway called for a settlement conference. He had seen enough. He wanted this resolved before it turned into a circus trial. The conference was held in a private meeting room at the courthouse. The table was long and polished. Graham and Tessa sat on one side, flanked by Warren Morrow and a second attorney, a litigator from the city. I sat on the other side with Sloane. I wore my best blazer, but my boots were scuffed from the bike pedals. I didn't care. Judge Calloway sat at the head. This has gone on long enough, the judge said. The allegations are serious. The evidence is troubling. But a trial will tear this family apart and drain the estate to zero. I want a number, Morrow whispered to Graham. Graham looked furious. His face flushed. Tessa looked at the wall, refusing to make eye contact. We are prepared to offer a nuisance settlement, Morrow said, to close the matter and preserve the family dignity. He slid a piece of paper across the table. $60,000. It was more than double the original inheritance. $60,000. I did the math in my head. It would pay off my credit card debt. It would buy a reliable car. It would pay my rent for 2 years. It would let me move to a new city and start over. I could disappear. I could leave the toxicity of Cedar Hollow behind. Addison, Morrow said, his voice dropping to that persuasive baritone. This is a lot of money. It is more than Marlene left you in the old will. It is a win. Take it, sign the release, and go live your life. You are young. Do you really want to spend the next 2 years in court? I looked at the check. I looked at the release. Addison Baker, acknowledge the validity of the October 14th will and withdraw all allegations of fraud. They wanted me to sell the truth. They wanted to pay $60,000 to buy a lie that covered up a $2 million theft. If I signed, Graham and Tessa kept the estate. They kept the house. They kept their standing in the community. They won. I looked at Graham. He was watching me with a smug expectation. He thought everyone had a price. He thought I was desperate enough to take the crumbs. I looked at Sloane. She didn't say a word. She just watched me. I pushed the paper back across the table. No, I said. The room went dead silent. $60,000 is a generous offer, Judge Calloway noted. It is blood money, I said, my voice steady. I don't want $60,000. I want the estate to be administered legally. I want the fraudulent will declared void. I want the stolen assets returned. Addison, don't be a fool, Graham snapped. You are biking to work. You are living in a hovel. You are going to lose everything. I have already lost everything. Graham, I said, you took my family. You took my reputation. You took my grandmother's final days. You have nothing left to threaten me with. Graham slammed his hand on the table. You ungrateful little brat, he shouted. You are just like your father, weak, always looking for a handout. I should have ruined you completely like I did last time. The air left the room. Like you did last time? I asked. The silence stretched, vibrating with tension. Graham's eyes widened. He realized he had slipped. What do you mean? Last time. I stood up. Graham clamped his mouth shut. Tessa reached out and gripped his arm, her nails digging into his suit jacket. My marketing job in Philly, I realized, the job I lost 3 years ago, the one that spiraled me into debt and divorce. I was fired because of an anonymous ethics complaint, a complaint about misappropriation of client funds that was never proven but enough to get me let go. You, I whispered, you sent the complaint. Graham didn't answer. He didn't have to. The look on his face, a mixture of panic and malice, said everything. He had orchestrated my downfall. He had sabotaged my career to make sure I was weak, to make sure I couldn't help Marlene when he started his takeover. I looked at the judge. I am not settling, Your Honor. Not for $60,000, not for $600,000. I am going to trial. Judge Calloway looked at Graham, then at me. Very well, he said. We will see you in court. I walked out of the room. My legs were shaking, but not from fear, from rage. Sloane caught up with me in the hallway. That was intense. She said, he just admitted to a pattern of behavior. He destroyed my life. Sloane, he didn't just steal the money. He broke me on purpose so he could steal the money. I unlocked my bike at the rack outside. The rain had turned to sleet. We are going to lose if we just fight about the will. I said, Morrow will find a way to suppress the emails. He will find a way to explain the handwriting. What are you thinking? Sloane asked. The land. I said. I looked up at the gray sky. Graham is obsessed with the estate. He mortgaged it. He renovated it. He stole for it. But Eldon Pike told me about a separate instrument, a trust from the first husband, the Vance Baker Land Trust. We never found the deed. Sloane said, because we were looking for a paper in a box. I said, we need to look at the dirt. I climbed onto the bike. Check the survey lines. Sloane, check the original plat map from 1970. If that trust exists, it owns the land. And if it owns the land, Graham doesn't just lose the house, he loses the ground it sits on. Sloane smiled. It was a vicious, beautiful smile. I will call the surveyor tomorrow. I rode away into the sleet. The cold bit at my face, but I didn't feel it. I was burning with a new purpose. I wasn't just fighting for restitution anymore. I was fighting for an exorcism. I was going to strip them of the one thing they valued more than family, their address. The winter in Cedar Hollow settled in with a gray, relentless weight. The snow on the sidewalks turned to slush, and the sky seemed permanently bruised. I was living on soup and adrenaline. My days divided between the market, the law office, and the library. We had opened a second front in the war, the land itself. Sloane had hired a title abstractor named Horace Finch. He was a man who looked like he was made of parchment paper, dry and brittle, with fingers stained by ink. He spent 3 days in the basement of the County Recorder of Deeds office, tracing the history of the Rowland Ridge estate back to the original land grants. On a Thursday morning, Horace laid a large map across Sloane's conference table. It was covered in red lines. Here's the problem, Horace said, his voice sounding like crinkling paper. The Rowland Ridge estate is not one contiguous parcel. It is an assemblage of 3 lots. Lot A is the house, Lot B is the carriage house, Lot C is the wooded acreage leading down to the valley. He tapped Lot A. When Marlene's first husband, Silas Vance, died in 1972. The property was in flux. The deed for Lot A, the main house, was transferred to Marlene, but the legal description was transcribed incorrectly. It references a survey marker that does not exist. What does that mean? I asked. It means the transfer was defective, Horace said. Technically, the title never fully cleared to the Baker estate when she remarried. It remained in a sort of legal limbo, tied to the marital estate of Vance and Marlene. And here is the interesting part, Sloane added, sliding a tax record toward me. Look who paid the property taxes on Lot A for the last 40 years. I looked. The bill was addressed to Marlene Baker, trustee. She didn't pay it as an individual. Sloane said, she paid it as a trustee. That means she knew the land was held in a trust. She treated it as a separate asset, just like Eldon Pike suggested. But Graham and Tessa live there, I said. They live there, but they do not own it, Sloane said. And if the title is defective, they cannot sell it. They cannot mortgage it. And most importantly, if we can find the trust instrument, we can prove that the land does not belong to the probate estate at all. It belongs to the trust. And who is the beneficiary of the trust? I asked, though I already suspected the answer. We need to find the paper, Sloane said. But this defect is our leverage. Graham refinanced that house 4 times. The banks missed the error because they were lazy. If we alert the court that the title is clouded, the whole house of cards collapses. While Horace was dissecting the dirt, David Chen, our forensic accountant, was dissecting the cash. He had finished tracing the Harbor Light Heritage Fund payments. The web was tighter than we thought. It is a closed loop, David told us, projecting a flowchart on the wall. Marlene's money went to Harbor Light. Harbor Light paid Apex renovations. I subpoenaed Apex's invoices. He clicked a button. An invoice appeared. Roof replacement, copper gutter installation, an HVAC upgrade. Address, 440 Ridge Road. That is the estate. I said, exactly. David said, they used $40,000 of Marlene's money they claimed she donated to charity, to upgrade the house they expected to inherit. They increased the value of their own asset with her stolen funds. It is conversion, Sloane said. It is civil theft, and it proves the fraud wasn't just about getting cash. It was about saving the house. They were insolvent. Addison. They needed the renovation to get the appraisal up so they could refinance again. I stared at the numbers. My grandmother's savings, scraped together over a lifetime of teaching, had been turned into copper gutters for a nephew who despised her. Sloane wasted no time. She filed an emergency motion for constructive trust and equitable lien. The argument was simple but devastating. The Rowland Ridge estate had been improved with stolen funds. Therefore, the estate itself was the fruit of the fraud. We asked the judge to freeze the property to prevent Graham from selling it or borrowing against it until the case was resolved. Judge Calloway granted the temporary restriction 24 hours later. He issued a lis pendens, a notice of pending litigation recorded against the deed. The effect was immediate. Graham's credit dried up. With the title clouded and a fraud lawsuit attached to the property, no bank would touch him. The panic was visible. I saw Tessa at the gas station 2 days later. She was pumping her own gas, something I had never seen her do. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she looked haggard. She saw me, hesitated, and then turned her back. She didn't have the energy to sneer. Then the wolves came for them. A week after the freeze, a new lawsuit appeared on the court docket. Ironwood Holdings versus Graham Rowland. It was a creditor suit. Nina found it. Ironwood Holdings is the shell company that held the previous lien. She said, apparently, Graham borrowed money from a hard money lender, a legal loan shark, to pay off the old mortgage. The interest rate is 18%, and since the freeze, he missed a payment. They are calling the loan. I said, they are suing for immediate repayment of $400,000. Nina said, and here's the kicker. Graham listed the estate as collateral, but he can't pledge the estate because the judge just froze it. He committed fraud on the loan application too. He is drowning. I said, he is flailing. Nina corrected, and he is dangerous. I kept my distance. I biked to work, did my shifts, and went home to my apartment. I kept the chair under the doorknob, but the silence from the Rowland camp was broken by the one person I had been waiting for, Lila. She came to my apartment on a Sunday night. It was snowing, big wet flakes that stuck to the windows. Lila was shivering, her face pale. I remembered something. She said, sitting on my folding chair. I gave her a mug of tea. Take your time. The day Dad brought the papers home. She said, the day he made me sign the will. He had an envelope, a thick yellow one. Did you see what was inside? No, she said. But I remember what he said. He was yelling at Mom. He said, the old bat went to the library. She thought she could hide it. And he threw the envelope on the counter. It had a stamp on it. A postage stamp? I asked. No, Lila said. A library stamp, like a due date stamp. Cedar Hollow Public Library. And there was a number written on it in marker. Scan Station 2. I sat up straighter. Scan Station 2. He burned the papers inside, Lila whispered. I saw him putting ashes in the disposal, but he didn't burn the envelope right away. It sat on the counter for 2 days before Mom threw it out. If he said she went to the library, I said, thinking aloud. And it was marked Scan Station 2. That means she didn't just notarize a document. She scanned it. Marlene was old-fashioned, but she understood backups. She didn't trust computers, but she trusted systems. I called Sloan. Meet me at the library in the morning. We were waiting at the door when Mrs. Higgins unlocked it at 9 o'clock. Mrs. Higgins, I said, I need to know about Scan Station 2. How does it work? Mrs. Higgins adjusted her glasses. It is a self-service machine, dear. You put your document in, and you can email it to yourself or save it to a USB drive. Does it keep a copy? Sloan asked. Technically, no, Mrs. Higgins said. For privacy reasons, it wipes the temporary memory after each session. My heart sank. However, Mrs. Higgins continued, we had a software glitch in October. The machine was failing to clear the sent items cache. We had to call a technician to wipe it manually on, let me see, November 1st. November 1st. I said, Marlene died October 12th. She was there October 1st. If she scanned it. I said, it might still be on the backup drive the technician created before he wiped the machine. Mrs. Higgins frowned. I suppose. The technician left a backup disk in the server room, just in case patrons complained about lost files. We keep them for 90 days. We need that disk. Sloan said. Mrs. Higgins hesitated. I cannot just give you library property. Sloan pulled a folded court order from her bag. This is a subpoena for any and all digital records pertaining to Marlene Baker or the date October 1st. Mrs. Higgins nodded. I will get the key. 10 minutes later, we were sitting at a computer terminal with a silver disk. The file directory was a mess of random file names. Tax return, PDF, homework, docx, flyer, JPG. I scrolled down to October 1st. There were 40 files. I looked for Marlene's email address. Nothing. I looked for her name. Nothing. Then I saw it. A file labeled, for Addison, PDF. I stopped breathing. Click it. Sloan said. I double-clicked. The file opened. It was a scanned image of a handwritten document. The handwriting was unmistakable. It was Marlene's. It wasn't a codicil. The title at the top read, Directive of Intent and Location of Assets. I read the text, my eyes burning. Marlene Baker, being of sound mind but under duress from my son Graham Rowland, hereby declare that any will produced after this date is invalid. I am being pressured to sign documents I do not understand. My true intent is for my granddaughter, Addison Baker, to inherit the funds in my savings account. Furthermore, regarding the property known as Rowland Ridge, the land is held in the Vance Baker Land Trust. The deed and the trust instrument are located in Safe Deposit Box 309 at Cedar Federal Bank. The key is taped beneath the bottom drawer of my sewing desk. If this directive is found, it means I was unable to stop them. Signed, Marlene Baker, October 1st, 2025. Notarized, Sarah Jenkins. It was everything. It was the voice from the grave. She didn't just leave me money, I whispered. She left me a map. We printed the document. Sloan held it like it was a holy relic. Safe Deposit Box 309, Sloan said. Cedar Federal. We went straight to the bank. The branch manager, a woman named Mrs. Gable, the same woman who had turned her back on me at the pharmacy, looked at the court order Sloan presented. She looked at me, then at Sloan. This box is listed under Marlene Baker, she said stiffly, but the keys, we have authorization to drill. Sloan said, unless you want to explain to Judge Calloway why you are obstructing a fraud investigation, Mrs. Gable Pale, I will get the drill. We went into the vault. The air was cool and smelled of steel. The maintenance man drilled the lock. It took 5 minutes of grinding noise that set my teeth on edge. Then, the little door swung open. Mrs. Gable pulled out the long metal box and set it on the table. I opened it. There were no jewels. There was no cash. There was a thick envelope, yellowed with age, labeled Vance Baker Land Trust, and underneath it, a smaller envelope labeled Addison. I opened the trust document first. It was dated 1971. I, Silas Vance, established this trust for the benefit of my wife, Marlene Vance, later Baker, and her descendants. I flipped to the back. There was a section titled Article 7, Protection of Assets. I read it aloud. In the event that any beneficiary or potential beneficiary attempts to acquire the assets of this trust through fraud, coercion, or any challenge to the rightful trustee's intent, all assets held by the trust shall immediately revert to the trust corpus and be distributed to the contingent beneficiary named in Schedule B. I turned to Schedule B. It was a single page. Updated 5 years ago. Contingent beneficiary, Addison Baker. Sloane let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks. "It is a poison pill," she said. Silas Vance was paranoid about land grabbers. He built a trigger into the deed. If Graham tried to steal it, which he did by forging the will and the mortgage, he automatically triggered the forfeiture clause. By trying to take everything, I said, he lost everything. "Technically," Sloane said, looking at the papers, the moment he forged that signature, the house stopped being his potential inheritance and became your property. I looked at the smaller envelope labeled Addison. I opened it. Inside was a cashier's check for $25,000, dated 5 years ago, and a note. "Addison, this is for you. Start your life. Don't look back." I held the check. She had tried to give it to me years ago. She had saved it. We walked out of the bank into the blinding white of the snow. I felt lighter than I had in years. The heavy coat didn't feel heavy anymore. "We have them," I said. "We have them." Sloane agreed. "I am filing for a final evidentiary hearing. We are going to present the scan, the trust, and the forfeiture clause." The hearing was set for December 20th, 4 days before Christmas. The Rowlands tried to delay. Morrow filed motion after motion, claiming the scan was inadmissible, claiming the trust was void because of the rule against perpetuities, claiming the safe deposit box had been accessed illegally. Judge Calloway denied every single motion. On the morning of the hearing, the courthouse was decorated with cheap tinsel and plastic wreaths. It felt surreal to be walking into a battle for millions of dollars past a cardboard Santa Claus. I wore a suit I had bought at a thrift store. It fit perfectly. The courtroom was packed. The story had leaked. The Cedar Hollow Gazette had run a headline. "Estate battle turns criminal. Granddaughter alleges fraud." The town, which had shunned me for weeks, was now hungry for the drama. Graham and Tessa sat at the defense table. Graham looked shrunken. His suit hung loosely on him. Tessa was staring straight ahead, her hands gripping her purse so tightly her knuckles were white. Warren Morrow looked tired. He knew the ship was sinking. Judge Calloway took the bench. "We are here for the final determination of the estate of Marlene Baker," he said. Sloane stood up. "Your Honor," she began, "we are not just asking for the reinstatement of the prior will. We are asking for the enforcement of the Vance Baker Land Trust. We have evidence that the respondents, Graham and Tessa Rowland, engaged in a systematic conspiracy to defraud the decedent, forge legal instruments, and dissipate the assets of the estate. Call your first witness," the judge said. We called the handwriting expert. She testified about the mortgage forgery. We called the forensic accountant. He testified about the Harbor Light money laundering. Then, we called Mrs. Higgins from the library. She sat in the witness box, looking nervous but determined. "Mrs. Higgins," Sloane asked, "can you identify this document?" She held up the printout of the scan. "Yes," Mrs. Higgins said, "that is a file retrieved from our server backup. It was created on October 1st at Scan Station 2. And who was using Scan Station 2 at that time?" Mrs. Higgins consulted her log. Marlene Baker. She signed in at 10:30, and the document itself. Sloane said. It references a safe deposit box. Morrow stood up. Objection. Hearsay. Overruled. The judge said, It is a directive of the decedent. It goes to state of mind. Sloane introduced the trust document found in the box. She read the forfeiture clause aloud. Shall immediately revert to the trust corpus and be distributed to the contingent beneficiary. Graham's head snapped up. He hadn't known about the clause. Morrow hadn't told him. Or maybe Morrow hadn't bothered to read the old trust papers carefully. Sloane turned to the judge. Your Honor, Graham Rowland attempted to acquire the estate through fraud. He forged a will. He forged a mortgage. Under the clear terms of the trust, his actions disqualify him from inheritance and trigger the transfer of the land to Addison Baker. She paused. The path to the $2.2 million estate is not through the probate of the fake will. It is through the restitution mandated by the trust. Addison Baker owns the land. Graham Rowland is trespassing. The courtroom buzzed. Graham stood up, his face purple. That is a lie, he shouted. That trust is 50 years old. It is obsolete. I paid the mortgage on that house. I put a new roof on it. Judge Calloway banged his gavel. Sit down. Mr. Rowland. Graham remained standing. You can't do this. I am the son. She is nothing. She is a failed little girl who couldn't keep a husband. Sit down, the judge roared. Graham collapsed into his chair. Tessa put her face in her hands. Morrow stood up slowly. Your Honor, we argue that the trust was implicitly revoked by the subsequent wills. Miss Morrow. The judge cut him off. You have presented a will with dubious witnesses, a capacity letter from a deceased doctor, and now you are arguing against a trust instrument that your client's mother paid taxes on for 40 years? The judge leaned forward. I have seen enough. I am scheduling a ruling for tomorrow morning, and I suggest, Mr. Morrow, that you advise your clients to prepare for a very different reality than the one they felt entitled to. We walked out of the courtroom. I stopped in the hallway. Graham was coming out behind us. He stopped when he saw me. His eyes were full of hate. But underneath the hate was terror. You didn't win, he hissed. You just stole it. I looked at him. I looked at the man who had ruined my career, who had bullied my grandmother, who had forged her name. I didn't steal anything. Graham, I said calmly, I just picked up the keys you dropped. He stormed past me. I went home to my apartment. I sat on the floor with the $25,000 cashier's check. It was just paper, but the trust. The trust was the land. I closed my eyes. I could see the house on the hill, the stone walls, the copper gutters paid for with stolen money, the view of the valley. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a monument to what happens when you underestimate the person you are trying to erase. Tomorrow, the judge would rule, but I already knew the verdict. The Rowlands had played a game of power, but they had forgotten the most important rule of the game. Never bet against a woman who has nothing left to lose. I slept soundly for the first time in months. The chair was not under the doorknob. I didn't need it. I was the one holding the door now. The courtroom on the final day of the hearing felt like a vacuum. The air was thin, recycled, and charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arms stand up. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Sloane Merritt. My hands were folded on the scarred wood surface, perfectly still. I had spent weeks shaking, biking through sleet, and hiding behind locked doors. Today, I was done shaking. Judge Calloway entered. The bailiff called the room to order. We began with the handwriting expert, Dr. Eliza Vance. She took the stand, adjusting the microphone with a clinical precision. Sloane walked her through the exhibits, the mortgage documents from August and the will from October 14th. Dr. Vance, Sloane said, can you describe your findings regarding the signature of Marlene Baker on these instruments? Dr. Vance pointed to a projection on the wall. It showed a magnified image of the signature on the mortgage refinancing agreement. The signature on the mortgage document exhibits what we call a pen lift. Doctor, Vance said, a natural signature is fluid, even a shaky signature, like that of an elderly person, flows, The writer knows their own name, but here, you can see microscopic pauses where the pen was lifted and repositioned. The writer was drawing the name, not signing it. And the slant? Sloane asked. Marlene Baker was left-handed. Doctor, Vance said. Her natural script had a sinister slant, a lean to the left. The signature on the mortgage and the signature on the updated will both lean significantly to the right. The pressure points suggest a right-handed writer trying to mimic a tremor, but failing to suppress their natural muscle memory. Sloane turned to the defense table. And did you compare this to any other samples? I did. Dr. Vance said, I compared it to a sample of Graham Rowland's handwriting. The angle of inclination is an exact match. Graham stared at the table. His face was a mask of red fury, his jaw working silently. Next, we moved to the capacity letter. Sloane called the custodian of records from the county health department. They confirmed what we already knew. Dr. Aris Thorne, the man who supposedly certified my grandmother's sanity 2 days before she signed the will, had been dead for 3 years. The records from the clinic were even more damning. Marlene hadn't been a patient at Pine Ward Community Clinic since 2018. The letter was a ghost document, created on a computer and printed on old letterhead. Warren Morrow tried to object, claiming it was a clerical error, but the judge cut him off. A clerical error is a typo. Mr. Morrow, Judge Calloway said, his voice low and dangerous. Resurrecting a dead physician to validate a will is not a clerical error. It is fraud upon the court. Then came the money. Sloane called Raphael Strickland's replacement, a nervous IT specialist Morrow had hired to scrub the servers, who had been subpoenaed and forced to turn over the backup logs. But we didn't need him for long. We had the emails. Sloane projected the email from Warren Morrow to Graham Rowland, dated September 15th. Subject: The Buffer. Content: Harbor Light is ready. We can move the funds in tranches of 3,000 to avoid red flags. Once it clears the charity account, we can pay Apex Renovations directly. The old lady won't know a thing. It cleans the file. The courtroom was silent. You could hear the hum of the ventilation system. Sloane turned to Warren Morrow, who was sitting at the defense table. He was no longer the arrogant power broker who had threatened to bury me. He was sweating. He was looking at the exit sign. Mr. Morrow. Sloane asked the empty air. Since Morrow wasn't on the stand yet, why would a historical charity pay a roofing contractor for a private residence? Morrow stood up. Your Honor, I must advise my client. Sit down, the judge snapped. Then, Sloane called Graham Rowland. He walked to the stand stiffly. He was trying to summon the charm that had served him for 50 years, the easy smile of the country club treasurer, but it looked brittle now. Mr. Rowland, Sloane began, you testified in your deposition that you were not involved in your mother's daily financial affairs. Is that correct? I helped her, Graham said, his voice smooth. I drove her to the bank. She was frail. Did you control her mail? Sloane asked. No, of course not. She liked to get her own mail. Sloane picked up a piece of paper. We have a sworn affidavit from the mail carrier, Mr. Rowland. She states that starting in August, you met her at the mailbox every day at 10 a.m. and took the mail directly from her hand. She states that Marlene came out once and asked if there was any mail, and you told her no, even though you were holding a stack of envelopes. Graham's eye twitched. The mail carrier was confused. And the mortgage? Sloane asked. You stated you didn't know about the refinancing until after she died. That is correct. Then why? Sloane asked, projecting the mortgage statement. Is your cell phone number listed as the primary contact for the lender? Graham paused. He licked his lips. I might have put my number down in case of emergencies. So you did know about the mortgage? I knew she was thinking about it. Graham snapped. The house needed repairs. It was falling apart. So you forged her signature to save the house? Sloane pressed. I didn't forge anything, Graham shouted. He leaned forward, gripping the railing of the witness box. She was senile. She didn't understand the finances. I had to take care of it. If I hadn't acted, the bank would have taken it. So you admit you acted? Sloane asked quietly. You admit you executed the documents because she wouldn't? Graham froze. He realized what he had said. He had just admitted that the actions were his, not hers. I did what was necessary, he muttered. The judge looked down at him over his glasses. The credibility of this witness is non-existent, he said to the court reporter. Note that for the record. Finally, Tessa took the stand. She was different. Graham was angry. Tessa was broken. She sat in the chair, looking small. Mrs. Rowland. Sloane asked gently, "Why did you offer Addison Baker $5,000 to drop the case?" Tessa looked at me. Her eyes were filled with tears. "We were drowning," she whispered. "Can you explain?" "Graham made bad investments," she said. Her voice was so quiet the stenographer had to lean in. "The consulting firm. It hasn't made money in 5 years. We were living on credit. We took out a second mortgage on the estate, then a third. We owed everyone. And when the payments became too high?" Sloane asked. "We stopped paying," Tessa said. "The bank sent a foreclosure notice in July. They were going to take the house. It was the only thing we had left. Our status, our friends. If we lost the Rowland estate, we were nobodies." "So you took Marlene's money?" "We borrowed it," Tessa cried out. "We meant to pay it back. We just needed to fix the roof and get the appraisal up so we could refinance again and pay off the hard money loan. We just needed time." "And Addison?" Sloane asked. "Why cut her out?" "Because she would have wanted the money," Tessa sobbed. $25,000. We needed that for the closing costs. Every penny mattered. If we gave it to her, the whole deal would have collapsed. We did it to keep the family safe. To keep your family safe," Sloane corrected, "by destroying hers." Tessa put her face in her hands and wept. It was the sound of a woman who had spent years running on a treadmill of lies, finally falling off. Sloane looked at the judge. No further questions. We took a recess for lunch. I sat in the hallway on a wooden bench, eating an apple I had brought from home. I couldn't eat anything heavier. My stomach was in knots. Not from fear, but from the sheer weight of the tragedy. They had destroyed themselves. They were so afraid of looking poor that they had become criminals. When we returned, Judge Calloway was ready to rule. He didn't waste time. "I find by clear and convincing evidence that the will dated October 14th is a forgery and is hereby declared void ab initio," the judge said. "I find that the mortgage documents executed in August were fraudulent. I find that the defendants, Graham and Tessa Rowland, engaged in a conspiracy to dissipate the assets of the estate." He shuffled his papers. "Furthermore, regarding the Vance Baker Land Trust, the court recognizes the validity of the trust instrument located in the safe deposit box. The forfeiture clause is clear. By attempting to defraud the trust and its beneficiaries, Graham Rowland has forfeited his interest." Graham let out a low moan. "However," the judge continued, "we have a unique situation. The funds stolen from Marlene Baker were used to improve the real property. The new roof, the HVAC, the mortgage payments, these were paid for with the decedent's money. Therefore, the remedy must address both the theft and the property." He looked directly at me. "I am ordering the creation of a constructive trust. The Rowland Ridge estate, in its entirety, is hereby seized by the court. The title is stripped from the Rowland family. The property is placed into the constructive trust for the benefit of the victim of the fraud, Addison Baker." I stopped breathing. Because the defendants have no other assets to satisfy a restitution judgment, as evidenced by their own testimony of insolvency, the property itself satisfies the debt. Addison Baker is named sole trustee and beneficiary. She is granted immediate possession. He banged the gavel. The defendants have 48 hours to vacate the premises. Court is adjourned. The room exploded into noise. I sat there, frozen. $2.2 million. The house, the land, the history, it was mine. Graham was shouting at his lawyer. Tessa was staring at the wall. Sloane turned to me and smiled. It was a tired, genuine smile. "You did it," she said. "You took the house." I stood up. My legs felt heavy. "I didn't take it," I said. "They gave it to me. They wrapped it in lies and handed it over." We walked out of the courtroom into the lobby. The winter sun was streaming through the high windows, illuminating the dust motes. My phone started buzzing in my pocket. I looked at the screen. It was my cousin Sarah, then my Aunt Linda, then a number I didn't recognize. I answered Sarah's call. "Addie," she screamed. "Oh my God, we just heard. You won. I always knew you were brave." I told Mom. "Addison is a fighter. We are so proud of you." I listened to her voice, high and shrill. Last week, she wouldn't let me come to a birthday party. Last week, she thought I was unstable. "Thank you, Sarah," I said. My voice was flat. "We should celebrate," she said. "Maybe we can have Christmas at the estate this year? Like old times?" I closed my eyes. They wanted back in. They wanted the status of the house. They didn't care about me. They cared about the address. I am not sure. "Sarah," I said, "I have a lot to do." I hung up. I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Lila. She looked terrible. Her eyes were red, her face blotchy. She was holding her coat tight around her. "Addison," she said. "Lila." I said, I am sorry," she whispered. "I was so scared. I know that is not an excuse, but I am sorry." She looked at me, waiting. She wanted absolution. She wanted me to tell her it was okay, that we were family, that the slate was wiped clean. I looked at my cousin. I saw the fear that had ruled her life. I saw the weakness. "I am not going to punish you. Lila," I said, "I am not going to sue you for signing the will. I told the judge you were coerced. You are safe." Lila let out a sob of relief. Thank you, Addie." "But," I continued, my voice steady, "I can't pretend this didn't happen. You watched them gaslight me. You watched me bike to work in the snow while you lived in the carriage house. You knew the truth and you stayed silent until the very end." Lila flinched. "I hope you find a way to be free of them," I said, "but I can't carry you anymore." Lila nodded slowly. She wiped her nose with her sleeve. "I understand," she said. She turned and walked away, out the heavy glass doors and into the snow. She looked small and lonely, but for the first time, she was walking on her own 2 feet. I waited until evening to go to the house. I drove a rental car Sloan had arranged for me. The drive up Ridge Road was treacherous, the asphalt slick with black ice. I pulled up to the gate. It was open. The moving vans were already gone. Graham and Tessa had fled. They hadn't waited for the 48 hours. The shame was too great. I parked in the circular driveway. The house loomed above me, a massive silhouette of stone and slate against the indigo sky. It was beautiful, it was imposing, and it was mine. I walked up the steps, the copper gutters, the ones paid for with my grandmother's life savings, gleamed dully in the moonlight. I took the key from my pocket. It was the new key the sheriff had given Sloan. I unlocked the heavy front door. The house was cold. They had turned off the heat when they left, a final petty act of defiance. I flipped the switch in the foyer. The chandelier flickered to life. The furniture was gone. They had taken everything they could carry. The rugs, the paintings, the silver. The house echoed with emptiness, but the bones were there. The high ceilings, the crown molding, the fireplace where Marlene used to roast chestnuts. I walked through the empty rooms, the dining room where Graham had sneered at me, the kitchen where Tessa had offered me $5,000, the study where they had scrubbed the desk clean. It felt heavy. It didn't feel like a victory lap. It felt like walking through a graveyard. I went to the library. The shelves were bare, stripped of the books Marlene had loved. I stood by the window looking out over the valley. The lights of Cedar Hollow twinkled below, indifferent to the war that had just ended on this hill. I thought of Marlene. I thought of her hiding in the library, scanning a document at Station 2, terrified of her own son. "You did it, Grandma," I whispered. I imagined her voice, rasping and warm. "I put it where your grandfather wanted it." She hadn't just put the paper in the box. She had put the truth in the land. She had anchored her legacy in the dirt itself, knowing that Graham's greed would make him try to dig it up, and in doing so, he would fall into the hole he created. I leaned my forehead against the cold glass. I was 33. I owned a $2 million estate. I had no car, no job, and a family that either hated me or wanted to use me. But I had the truth. I saw headlights sweep across the driveway. I stiffened. A car had pulled up to the gate. It was idling there, the engine running, the exhaust puffing white clouds into the darkness. I couldn't see the driver. The headlights were blinding. Was it a reporter? The story was big news. Was it a creditor? Graham owed money to dangerous people. Maybe they thought the new owner should pay. Or was it Graham? Coming back for one last scream? Coming back to burn down what he couldn't keep? My heart hammered against my ribs. I wasn't safe. Not really. Winning a lawsuit doesn't stop a brick through a window. It doesn't stop a match. I stepped back from the window. I walked to the front door. I checked the lock. It was solid brass, heavy and cold. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I wasn't standing in the doorway of a home yet. I was standing in a fortress. I watched the car through the peephole. It sat there for another minute, a mechanical beast breathing in the cold. Then, slowly, it backed up and drove away down the ridge. I let out a breath. I was alone in the big, empty house. I walked to the center of the foyer and sat on the floor, pulling my knees to my chest. I had the keys. I had the deed. I had the power. But as I looked around at the shadows stretching across the floor, I realized that the hardest part wasn't fighting for the estate. The hardest part would be living in it. I closed my eyes and listened to the silence. It was the sound of restitution. It was the sound of a slate wiped clean, leaving only the terrifying, blank space of a future I now had to write for myself. Thank you for listening to this story. I hope you enjoyed following Addison's journey from the betrayal in Cedar Hollow to the final verdict at Rowland Ridge. It was a long road, but justice has a way of finding its path, even through the snow. I would love to hear from you. Please leave a comment below and tell me where you are listening from today. It is always amazing to see how far these stories travel. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe to Revenge Stories. We have many more tales of justice, retribution, and the long game coming soon. Share your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done if you were in Addison's shoes? Would you have taken the settlement, or would you have fought for the house? Thank you for your time, and I will see you in the next story.